What if I told you that a single moment changed everything I thought I knew about life, death, and Hollywood? I had always been drawn to bright lights and big promises. Growing up, I watched my favorite stars on the silver screen and convinced myself I'd find the same magic if I just got closer to them. I moved to Los Angeles with a suitcase full of ambition, chasing dreams that always seemed just out of reach. For years, I hovered on the periphery of success, small roles here, connections that never quite materialized there. On some level, I knew I was hunting for validation in a world that thrived on illusions. Still, I kept running toward that flickering glow, believing the next audition or the next script could be my breakthrough. Yet nothing I'd encountered could prepare me for what happened on a stormy night in January 2023. The rain fell in sheets that evening. It was the kind of downpour that makes you flinch with every thunderclap. The clouds so low they seemed to choke the skyline. I remember gripping the steering wheel, feeling frustrated by a long day that offered more closed doors than open ones. My phone buzzed incessantly with vague industry texts, dead ends, last-minute cancellations, the usual chain of empty promises. Somehow, that night felt different. The city streets were slick with water and nearly empty, as though everyone else had the good sense to stay home. I glanced at the time, 10:32 p.m., just before my world shattered. One moment I was on the freeway, the next, my car spun out of control. My tires lost traction, and I slammed on the brakes with no response. Metal collided with concrete, a deafening crash echoing in my ears before everything went silent. I don't recall the precise moment my heart stopped, but I do remember the surreal sense of floating. It was as if I hovered above my body, watching the twisted metal and shattered glass from a distance. I could still hear the crunching sound, but it felt oddly muted, like a movie playing in another room. Strangely, I wasn't terrified. Fear flickered through me. Yet there was also a bizarre calm creeping in, as though I was more observer than victim. Time stretched and warped every detail. My shaky breaths, the smell of burning rubber, the heavy scent of rain, became painfully vivid. I knew I was in serious trouble. I just didn't feel it the way I would have expected. In that suspended moment, I caught glimpses of the life I'd been living, the endless auditions, the forced smiles, the relentless hustle to prove my worth. It all seemed suddenly superficial, as if I'd spent years propping up a facade that might collapse with a single gust of wind. A kind of darkness folded around me. It felt like someone turned off the lights in my head, and I slipped away. I don't have the medical report in front of me, but I learned later I was clinically dead for about 3 minutes. That's a short span on the clock, but it was long enough for my entire worldview to shift. Instead of an empty void, I experienced something I can only describe as a transition, a gentle pull that guided me deeper into a space without clear boundaries. I had no sense of a physical body, yet my awareness felt sharper than ever. My thoughts shifted from raw panic to a peaceful curiosity. Family faces flashed before me. I thought of my mother's hands braiding my hair when I was little, and how I'd never paused to appreciate such simple acts of love. I recalled my father's distant yet supportive words when I first said I was moving to a yacht. In that hazy in-between, those memories felt heartbreakingly precious. Then came the light. It wasn't a harsh beam or something out of a sci-fi movie. It was warm, comforting, and oddly familiar, like I had known this light all my life without realizing it. There was a pull toward it, gentle, inviting. I let myself be drawn in, surrendering to a force that felt profoundly loving. That's when I noticed a figure within the radiance. I couldn't make out a face, but I sensed an immense kindness emanating from whatever stood there. Instead of speaking in words, it communicated in waves of emotion and understanding. I realized I was standing in a realm where time and language didn't apply in the usual way. A flood of images rushed through me, scenes that seemed random at first. A child playing on a beach, a family comforting each other after a flood, a glitzy Hollywood premiere. I felt enveloped by an overwhelming sense of empathy. Every image sparked a deep resonance that made me see life as a tapestry of interconnected stories. That's when I understood I was seeing more than random snapshots. These images were connected by a central theme: the power of storytelling and how it shapes our collective emotions, especially in moments of crisis. I found myself thinking about Hollywood, the very place I had spent years idolizing and resentfully chasing. The figure conveyed to me that Hollywood wasn't just an entertainment hub. It was a potent amplifier of human thought and emotion. Suddenly, I saw natural disasters playing out on a screen in my mind. There were hurricanes, wildfires, earthquakes. Some I recognized from news footage, others felt like future events. Then I witnessed how these events were depicted in films, TV shows, and news broadcasts. I watched how the narratives were spun, how the stories told to millions of viewers around the globe shaped not only their fears, but also their sense of hope or despair. I was simultaneously awed and skeptical. Could the film industry truly hold such influence over our perception of real-world catastrophes? As though sensing my doubt, the figure showed me a kind of energetic map, like glowing lines connecting people's thoughts, emotions, and reactions. Whenever a major blockbuster depicted cataclysmic events, the emotional reverberations traveled through these lines, touching far more than just box office returns. It was as if the very stories we create can loop back into our reality, reinforcing cycles of fear or sparking waves of collective compassion. I felt my chest tighten, grappling with the possibility that what I once dismissed as mere entertainment could actually mold our collective psyche. While I was still absorbing this, another layer of the vision came into view: the hush-hush interplay between powerful media executives and certain narratives, especially during times of actual disasters. I remember glimpsing an unsettling image of an earthquake striking the West Coast: broken buildings, cracked roads, a sense of widespread panic. The date that flashed through my mind hinted at March of some unspecified year. I couldn't tell if it was a vision of something imminent or symbolic of how fragile things truly are, yet the clarity of it shook me. This potential disaster, whatever its timing, felt like a warning of just how intertwined our stories and our realities might become. Emotions coursed through me: fear at the scale of what I was witnessing, but also a profound sense of responsibility. In that space, I realized I'd spent so long chasing fame and recognition that I'd never considered how the stories we tell can profoundly influence how we collectively respond to real-world hardships. The figure radiated reassurance, as though telling me, "You are part of this, and you can help shape it." For a moment, my cynicism flared. I was just a struggling actor-writer who could barely land a steady gig, let alone shift cultural paradigms. But the warmth around me felt so certain, so uplifting, that doubt began to crumble. Perhaps any of us, in our own way, can contribute to a more conscious approach to storytelling. Maybe the real power was in understanding the weight of what we create and consume. This realization sank deep into my core. My heart, that had physically stopped, now felt resurrected by a new purpose: to understand how narratives mold our perceptions, and in turn, our actions. When I finally came back to consciousness, I was in a hospital bed. The beeping of monitors and the antiseptic smell of disinfectant replaced the otherworldly calm I'd experienced. My body ached in ways I never knew possible. I had fractures in my left arm, bruised ribs, and a terrible concussion, but the medical staff said I was unbelievably lucky. They couldn't explain how I had survived the impact that nearly flattened my car. My eyes filled with tears, not just from pain, but from the sheer wonder of being alive. Everyone around me, nurses, doctors, a few concerned friends, looked relieved, but no one had any idea of the tremendous shift happening inside me. I lay there, replaying the vision, the guide, and the revelations in my head, trying to piece together what I was meant to do next hour. During my recovery, I found myself strangely detached from the industry hustle that had once consumed me. Scripts that landed in my inbox suddenly felt hollow if they carried cheap shock value without real heart. I spent hours pondering how to use my voice in a way that honored the profound lessons I had gleaned from the brink of death. This was bigger than me. It was about an entire ecosystem of storytellers, viewers, and the emotional ripple effects that bind us all. I realized that every line of dialogue, every scene, and every sensationalized headline has the potential to either uplift or tear down. I began to question my motives in ways I never had before. Was I complicit in perpetuating shallow narratives? Could I push for deeper authenticity without sacrificing creativity? Still, stepping back into Hollywood was daunting. Everything felt tinted by my new perspective. I'd wander onto a set or into a meeting and sense the tension between commerce and art. People in suits would talk about what sells during disaster seasons, referencing global events as convenient tie-ins for big-budget releases. I found that deeply unsettling. My near-death experience had shown me how these stories can cement fear in our collective psyche, while also carrying the potential to foster empathy and unity if handled differently. But who was I to propose a shift? My track record was modest at best, and I knew cynics would dismiss my revelations as a post-traumatic hallucination. Yet, I couldn't ignore what I'd seen. Bit by bit, I started to speak up in meetings. I pitched projects that offered hope without glossing over real struggles. I insisted that we highlight the human courage that emerges in the face of disasters. More often than not, I was met with polite nods and quick subject changes, but I kept at it. I felt compelled to at least try to open a dialogue about the power we wield in shaping how audiences perceive the world's upheavals. The negativity I encountered only clarified my resolve. If the general machinery of Hollywood was reluctant to adapt, I would find my own path. Rather than purely chasing roles, I began writing my own scripts, injecting them with a dose of authenticity inspired by my experience. I didn't want to preach or turn them into moral lessons, but I did hope they would spark some introspection in anyone who watched. As weeks turned into months, I also found myself drawn to grassroots communities, people who believed in conscious media consumption. We shared stories of how certain films or documentaries had changed our perspectives on life and adversity. Some had faced loss or trauma of their own, and we bonded over the idea that narratives could guide people toward healing. I learned that media, at its core, is a mirror. It reflects our hopes and fears, and sometimes it distorts them. But if we hold that mirror with a steady hand, we can also reflect possibilities for compassion and resilience. That sense of responsibility weighed heavily on me, yet it also felt liberating. For the first time in my career, I wasn't just chasing stardom. I was exploring how to illuminate truths, no matter how hard they might be to accept. In moments of quiet reflection, I couldn't shake the memory of that predicted earthquake. Whether it was literal or metaphorical, it underscored the fragility of life and the power of forewarning. I realized the point of that vision wasn't simply to scare me with impending doom. It served as a stark reminder that disasters, whether environmental or personal, can strike without warning, testing our collective empathy and resilience. I started talking to colleagues about readiness, not just in a physical sense, but in an emotional sense. How do we brace ourselves psychologically for the unthinkable? How do we process the media that floods our screens in the aftermath, shaping our fear or fueling our hope? Though I never claimed to have all the answers, I found meaning in raising these questions, inspiring others to be more mindful of the narratives we absorb. As my recovery progressed, I made a point of engaging directly with people who shared their own brushes with death or life-altering experiences. Some had survived accidents or illnesses. Others had felt a profound shift in their worldview through seemingly small moments. In each story, I recognized a thread of transformation, a deep awareness that life isn't just about personal gain. We are connected on levels we rarely stop to consider. The spark of empathy that was kindled in my near-death experience only grew stronger with each encounter. It guided me to challenge both the culture of superficial storytelling and my own tendency to get swept up in the glamour. I no longer saw my journey as a quest for applause. It became an invitation to others to reevaluate how we shape and share our collective fears and hopes. I began to hold informal gatherings, inviting writers, producers, and even some skeptical industry vets to discuss how we can handle depictions of natural disasters in a more responsible way. No, we weren't going to sanitize reality, but we could highlight the human spirit, the community support, and the resilience that blossoms when people band together. My accident reminded me that we have little control over when disaster strikes, but we do have control over how we respond and how we portray those responses. Some attendees were curious, others maintained that fear sells. I didn't want to argue. I wanted to plant seeds, and so I did, session by session, conversation by conversation by conversation. Still, the weight of everything I had seen sometimes felt overwhelming. On days when the old cynicism crept back, I'd revisit the memory of floating above my broken body in the crash. That raw vulnerability grounded me, pushing me to keep trying to shift the narrative, even in the smallest ways. I recalled the figure in the light and the wave of warmth that felt like unconditional love. Maybe that was just a hallucination, or maybe it was a gift, a glimpse into something beyond our everyday comprehension. Whatever it was, it gave me the courage to keep asking hard questions. What if we stopped feeding the cycle of sensational despair? What if we tapped into the deeper need for connection and understanding? So I began speaking more openly about my experience, urging anyone who would listen to examine how media influences their feelings about impending calamities. I wasn't accusing people of shallow viewing habits. I just wanted them to be conscious of what they absorb. When a headline announces a hurricane or wildfire, it isn't just a storyline for a summer blockbuster. Real lives are in peril, and real emotions are stirred. If we consistently dramatize tragedy for clicks and ticket sales, we risk fostering a perpetual cycle of fear. But if we look closer, we can also find acts of heroism, neighborhoods coming together, compassion bridging differences, stories that can catalyze hope and resilience. The more I shared, the more I noticed people leaning in, reflecting on their own relationships with the media they consume. I realized that the profound lesson of my near-death experience wasn't some secret code about future events or an instruction to shun Hollywood entirely. It was an invitation to recognize that the stories we tell each other, on screen or off, hold our power. That power can lead us toward dark places of hysteria and division, or it can unite and heal, depending on the choices we make when we craft and consume those stories. Once I fully accepted that responsibility, I found a strange sense of freedom. I didn't need to be a star. I just needed to be honest in my work and sincere in my intentions. Each day became an opportunity to let that guiding insight shape my choices. Whether I was rewriting a scene, endorsing a project, or simply talking to friends about the next big film coming out. Now, as I sit here reflecting, I feel something I never truly felt before, a sense of purpose. Maybe the city of dreams and I were always meant to have this complicated dance, leading me to a point where I could see beyond the glitz and illusions. I'm not here to dismantle the film industry or chastise everyone who loves a good disaster flick. Instead, I see my role as someone who can remind others, friends, colleagues, audiences, that we create and recreate our collective reality through the stories we embrace. Our fears and hopes mingle within these narratives, shaping our responses to real challenges. In that sense, Hollywood is more than a place. It's a mirror reflecting back what we believe, and sometimes what we don't yet dare to believe in ourselves. I invite you to join me in questioning the narratives we so readily accept. Ask yourself, how do these stories make me feel about the world around me? Do they feed hopelessness or stoke courage and empathy? In small ways, each of us can shift our mindset and encourage creators to do the same. That's where real transformation begins. Even if it seems like a drop in an ocean, those ripples matter. They can culminate in waves of change far beyond anything we might predict. If my experience in that realm of light taught me anything, it's that no act of compassion, no mindful story is ever wasted. I'm grateful you've stayed with me through this recollection, through the storm, the crash, and the revelations that followed. Sharing this hasn't been easy. There's a vulnerability in reliving those minutes when my heart stopped. But if it helps even one person see the power of storytelling in a new light, or reassess how they respond to media in moments of crisis, then every terrifying moment of that night was worth enduring. My hope is that we stand together in our commitment to be thoughtful storytellers and mindful spectators. We can't prevent every earthquake, every hurricane, or every fire, but we can shape how we handle the aftermath, both in our hearts and on our screens. I'll continue to weave what I learned into every project I touch, and I encourage you to do the same in whatever way fits your life. Keep asking questions, keep challenging the status quo when it runs on fear, and keep nurturing that spark of empathy that binds us. Because in the end, it's not just about Hollywood or natural disasters. It's about recognizing our shared responsibility for the stories we create and the collective future we imagine. Thank you for allowing me to share my journey. I hope it sparks something in you too.